So today we're going to be doing a little bit of a different type of video to give you guys some room to breathe away from the heavy topics. We're going to talk about some of the books that we're currently reading and that we really liked.
I'm going to start off with my two books that I came up with, and it is Holes by Sachar and The Stranger by Albert Camus. So first I'm going to be talking to you guys about Holes. So this, as most of you guys know, it's a Newbery Medal Prize winning book. It says on the stamp here. But as most of you guys know, it's meant for younger readers, not really high school, but maybe like middle school level. I read this in middle school, but then I remember like not really liking it for some reason. And then past summer, like last summer, I read it again, and I never realized how good of a book it is. And it's one of those moments when you read one of your favorite books from childhood again, and then you realize how good it is and what kind of messages are actually embedded inside the novel, and then you're like shocked because you never realized it before. So that was kind of like my experience with Holes, and that's kind of like how I started to fall in love with it again, and I reread like a couple chapters of it since then. And I think what I really loved about this book was, even though it's a pretty basic story, the plotline is not too complicated to follow. I feel like it has a lot of sweet messages, I guess, like moral messages that kind of make you feel very warm inside, kind of like childhood memories kind of a story. So it has that element in the novel, but it also has a lot of elements that are philosophical and psychological. And because of that, although it's a very simple story and a heartwarming story to a certain extent, even though it has like some violent moments, it's overall a very deep book and profound one that a lot of people can benefit from, which is probably the reason why it's very famous. If you guys have read this before, or you were forced to read it in school or something and you remember not really enjoying it, I really recommend you guys to read it again, because I was really shocked by how good it was. And I actually did a lot of that last summer. I reread a lot of books. Like I reread A Separate Peace by John Knowles, I think, and I also reread The Giver. And it was just really interesting to try reading some of those books that I read when I was younger again and realize what other messages are within it. So just overall, even if it's not this one, I would really recommend try rereading books that you read in your childhood.
So my two books are The Things They Carry by Tim O'Brien and Native Speaker by Chang-rae. So the one that I read before is The Things They Carried, and this book, actually the way that I got to know it is we were forced to read an excerpt of it at school in sophomore year, and after reading just like the beginning part of it, I really wanted to read it. And I didn't get the chance to until I had to choose a book to write about for a paper. And so I obviously chose this one because I wanted to read something that I would enjoy. And the thing about this book is that it's very unique, and it's not really like other types of like novels. It's not even really considered a novel, it's an anthology. And so basically what the premise of this book is that it's about a narrator who kind of talks about his experience in the war and all the realities and the truths and the horrors of it, and he talks about little bits and pieces of his memory that he has from the war. And this is about the Vietnam War, by the way. A lot of it is very realistic, and the author tries to portray the war in a way that makes it feel as if you're in there with the narrator, and it's a lot of bits and pieces of it because it's like different short stories collected into one book. Because of that, there's a lot of parts where you can get confused because there's like a change in perspective, or like the narrator, you're not sure who the narrator really is, or there's also an element of metafiction, which is the author's attempt to include both fiction and nonfiction. So you don't really know if this is Tim O'Brien actually talking about his own life or if he's making something up. And it's also like known as like verisimilitude. It's a very good read if you want to take something like very slow, and you can read like bits and pieces of it and not in order, and it can still make sense. So it's more of a fun read, but then if you kind of analyze it and look deeper into it, you can really get a lot from this in terms of learning about the war, the Vietnam War, as well as learning about like a soldier's life before and after war.
Okay, so the next book that I'll be talking about is The Stranger by Albert Camus, and I studied this I think twice in my life for various reasons. I would not recommend reading this in middle school. That was like a very critical mistake in my life. It introduced existential crisis to me way too early. I reread and studied this last year for my literature class with this young lady. But that's kind of when I realized how much I love it, and it was also because I was reading The Plague by Albert Camus in my Korean class, like the Korean translated version. So I read a lot of Camus at once, and it kind of like made me fall in love with the author. So specifically about The Stranger, although it was kind of traumatizing for me when I was in middle school because I first realized what existential crisis is, when I think about it today, it's also kind of a valuable moment. Last year, like as I was studying this book, it's just kind of a good realization time of what life can look like from a lens that is completely different from what I have. So I think The Stranger is a great novel if you guys want to experience a narrator who you feel like you're not gonna like, but then you kind of start to empathize with in the end. And because of that, the ending is quite gruesome and it's quite emotionally violent, but even though it deals with a lot of politically and psychologically and philosophically controversial issues, you start to understand what the narrator is talking about and where he's coming from, and because of that, it becomes quite an emotional read for the reader. If you guys have a chance to study it rather than just read it, I would totally do that. It's much more of a study book than like a pleasure read. That's about it. Yeah.
My second book is Native Speaker by Chang-rae, and this one I'm actually currently reading and I didn't finish yet. I don't have like a full review of it, but I was introduced to this also in my sophomore year by my teacher, and she talked about this author and said he's very relatable in terms of, you know, international school students and TCKs, their culture kids, and it really just talks about a Korean man who is trying to fit into society in America as he tries to find a job that really suits him, as he tries to go through his marriage successfully. He learns a lot about what he feels like in a world that he thought he fit into, but he actually doesn't. And for this one, I feel like different from the things they carried, you really do have to read this all kind of, not at once, but in a short amount of time, because it's really easy to forget the main theme and the emotions that come with it. It's more of a very connected book, and in order to understand, like truly understand the meaning, you have to really read it in depth without much like without a gap in between. And the mistake I made was I read it and then I stopped reading it, and once I went back to it, it was really hard to understand. But now that I'm trying to read it all at once in a shorter amount of time, I feel like there is a lot of meaning in it, and behind the words that Chang-rae says, you can really tell that there is that pain of feeling left out in a world that he thought he fit into. And for me, I just felt like it was very relatable in that even though I'm in Korea, which is, you know, my home country, there's still an element of fear that I feel when maybe when I go to the US, or maybe when I'm like in my actual international community. There's that whole idea that we kind of feel of like not being able to fit in. And so I feel like the author did a really great job of trying to include Asian American people, as well as try to open the eyes of people who don't really understand like international students or Asian Americans.
So all in all, I guess we could say that school recommended books are actually quite good if you get into them. Share with us down below what your favorite books are.
And maybe like a statement about why and why you recommend it to us.
Yeah, and we can have a little bit of a book club here.
See you guys in our next video.
Bye!